Where are you listening from tonight? From what corner of the world do you join this quiet walk into history? Take a moment, if you'd like, to share your place in the comments, because I would love to know how far these whispers of the past are reaching. And as you settle in, don't forget to gently tap the like button, subscribe for more journeys into forgotten ages, and ring the little bell so you can always find your way back to these calm explorations. This is not just a history lesson, it is a space for sleepless minds, for tired hearts, for anyone who longs for a gentle companion while drifting into rest. Imagine yourself slowly closing your eyes as the hum of the present fades away. In your mind, step aboard a vessel carved of cedar, its sails catching a warm Mediterranean breeze. The sea is calm tonight, though you sense stories hidden in its waves, stories of travelers and wanderers, raiders and refugees. The world we are entering is not the one we know today, is the world of the late Bronze Age, where kings wrote letters on clay tablets, and gods were called upon in towering temples. Now picture vast palaces glowing with torchlight, their courtyards filled with merchants carrying goods from faraway lands, copper from Cyprus, grain from Egypt, ivory from Africa, moving in a great web of trade that bound kingdoms together. Yet beneath this surface of prosperity, shadows stirred. Something was coming, something no single pharaoh or king could stop. And that something would later be remembered simply as the Sea Peoples. Who were they? The question has haunted scholars for centuries. Egyptian scribes carved their names into temple walls, and modern archaeologists have traced their footprints across broken cities. But even now, the Sea Peoples remain wrapped in mystery, like a riddle half whispered across the waves. Were they fierce raiders seeking plunder, or were they homeless families searching for a new land? As we begin, I invite you to let your body relax. Sink deeper into your bed or chair and feel the quiet rhythm of your breath. This is not a hurried story, but a gentle unfolding. With each pause, with each detail, imagine yourself walking softly through the ruins of time, where the walls still whisper the lives of those who came before us. In this quiet, the story of the Sea Peoples waits for you. At the edge of the 13th century BCE, the world was both bright and fragile. Egypt was strong, though troubled by droughts and political strife. The Hittites ruled Anatolia, but their empire carried cracks along its foundations. Mycenaean Greece, with its grand palaces at places like Pylos and Mycenae, glittered with wealth, yet it too balanced on uncertain ground. Across the Mediterranean, trade routes tied kingdoms together like threads in a web. Ships carried tin and copper for bronze, wine and oil for feasts, and exotic goods for the rich. But what happens when one thread snaps? What happens when drought, war, or migration pulls at the strands? A single break could ripple through the entire network, leaving even the strongest kings vulnerable. This was the world the Sea Peoples entered. To Egyptians, they seemed to appear suddenly, rising out of the sea in ships bristling with warriors. But no people ever appear from nowhere. They had stories, homes, and reasons for moving, reasons we can still glimpse through scattered evidence. And it is here, in this meeting of evidence and imagination, that our walk must begin. Tonight, let us set aside the noisy arguments of textbooks and instead walk gently. We will not race to judgment, but linger on the details. Relief carvings, charred ruins, pottery shards, letters written in clay. These fragments are the footprints of those who came before. Follow them with me, slowly and carefully, and let us see what they reveal about the Sea Peoples. Perhaps you are listening under a blanket, with the soft hum of night around you. Or maybe you are at your desk, eyes weary, seeking calm in the rhythm of an ancient tale. However you arrived here, know that this is your invitation to drift between history and dream. For the story of the Sea Peoples is both history and legend, grounded in evidence, yet softened by the passing of millennia. And like all old stories, it speaks differently when told in a whisper. Close your eyes and picture the shoreline of an ancient harbor. Ships with high sterns and curved prows rest against the tide. Children run between carts piled with household goods. Women prepare food, while men sharpen weapons, not knowing whether they march toward safety or into danger. This is not just invasion, it is movement, it is migration, it is survival. And so, when the Egyptians carved the Sea Peoples into stone, they captured not only a battle, but a migration frozen in time. In those scenes, soldiers clash, yet families also appear, their lives entwined with war. The Sea Peoples carried more than weapons, they carried their children, their gods, their memories. And in this quiet reflection, we can almost hear their voices across the centuries. Think of the Mediterranean not as a barrier, but as a bridge. The sea that today divides nations once connected them. Its waters bore trade and war, pilgrims and pirates, farmers and refugees. The Sea Peoples were part of this living tide, rising and falling with the rhythms of a world in crisis. To understand them, we must listen not just to kings, but to the sea itself. It is easy to think of history as fixed, but in truth, it is fragile. Records break, cities burn, voices fade. What remains are fragments, partial, uncertain, suggestive. The Sea Peoples remind us how much of the past is guesswork, and how every generation must reconstruct it anew. Tonight, our aim is not certainty, but gentleness. We walk not to conquer the past, but to listen to it. In that listening, perhaps we hear echoes of our own time, echoes of migration, displacement, and resilience. For though the Sea Peoples are ancient, their struggles feel strangely familiar. Hunger, drought, and the search for home are themes as old as humanity. So, as you lie in the hush of night, imagine those distant shores once more. See the flicker of campfires, hear the creak of ships, feel the tension of families caught between worlds. The Sea Peoples were more than raiders. They were wanderers in a collapsing age. And tonight, their story drifts softly to meet you. Let your thoughts float like ships across calm water. Each detail we will explore, every temple wall, every broken pot, every half-burned letter will carry us further into their mystery. But for now, remain with me in this opening scene. The stage is set, the kingdoms are poised, the sea is quiet, but change is already on the horizon. It is here that our journey begins, and before we step deeper, remember, this space is for you. If you are finding calm in this quiet storytelling, let me know with a gentle like. If you wish to join me on future nights, press subscribe and ring the bell so you never lose your way. And please, in the comments, share where in the world you are listening from tonight. Let us build a map of voices, all gathered around the same ancient fire. History is not only in books, it is in the way we remember together. As you share, others will see, and we become a community of sleepless historians, keeping watch with one another. The Sea Peoples once traveled across the sea, carrying their homes on wagons and ships. Now we travel together through time, carrying questions and reflections into the night. And in this way, the story continues. The stage is set. The lights of the Bronze Age kingdoms flicker in the distance. The seas are restless, and unseen ships gather on the horizon. Ahead of us lies migration, conflict, collapse, and rebirth. Let us walk gently forward, into the story of the Sea Peoples. The first strong voice that tells us about the Sea Peoples comes not from modern books, but from the walls of an Egyptian temple. If you close your eyes, you can picture it. Medinet Habu, the grand mortuary temple of Pharaoh Ramesses III. Its walls are covered with scenes that glow even now in the desert sun, though they were carved more than 3,000 years ago. There, the king wanted to show the world that he had faced a storm of foreign invaders, people who came from the sea in strange ships. You can see them, rowers pulling hard, warriors bracing for combat, feathers rising from their helmets like the crests of birds. These are not the quiet records of scribes tucked away on clay tablets. They are loud, carved in stone, meant to be read by the eyes of eternity. And through these images, we hear the first echoes of a mysterious tide of people, a tide that unsettled even Egypt, a land that thought itself eternal. But look closer, and the story grows softer, more complicated, almost tender. The inscriptions at Medinet Habu describe battles, but battles alone cannot explain what we see. Among the ships and spears, there are families, women walking with children, oxen pulling carts heavy with belongings. These are not the details of a simple raid. They are the marks of migration. Imagine, for a moment, the slow creak of wooden wheels in the sand. The small hands of children clutching baskets. The tired faces of parents hoping for safety. Ramesses, of course, wanted to show triumph. He, the mighty defender, saving Egypt from chaos. But hidden inside his message of victory is another voice, one he did not intend. It is the voice of the displaced, those who carried their lives with them, even into the heart of danger. The Sea Peoples were not just warriors. They were wanderers, and the Egyptian walls reveal this in ways that words never could. And so, through Egypt's proud carvings, we glimpse an unintended story of vulnerability. Pharaoh's scribes named the strangers Sherdun, Shekelesh, Peleset, Denian. Each name was carved as if it captured a whole people. But what did these names truly mean? Were they tribes, allies, mercenaries, or perhaps just labels created for the orderliness of record-keeping? To the Egyptians, they were outsiders, a threat that needed a name, and so a list was made. To us, centuries later, these names are like fragments of a dream. They suggest islands and coastlines, echoes of the Aegean, whispers from Anatolia, hints of wanderers who had already traveled far. But behind every name was a heartbeat, and behind every label was a family carrying a story we will never fully know. That is what makes this part of history so haunting. It is not only the clash of armies, but also the quiet persistence of human lives caught in motion. The Egyptian walls speak of victory, yet their images tell us much more. They tell of movement, of survival, of a humanity that slips between lines of stone. The reliefs are vivid. You can see the shapes of ships, their hulls curving upward, the oars cutting into painted water. Warriors raise shields, archers draw bows. The pharaoh stands taller than all, secure in his divine protection. But the eye wanders, and the calm listener begins to notice other details. There are wagons pulled by oxen. There are women with children, their faces carved in smaller, gentler strokes, almost lost in the chaos of spears and arrows. Why would an invading army bring their families to battle? The question lingers like a whisper. If they came only to plunder, why risk bringing children into the line of fire? The images suggest something larger, something that goes beyond the language of invasion. It is the language of migration, of people who moved not as soldiers alone, but as whole communities. The pharaoh's message was clear. Egypt stood, Egypt prevailed, Egypt was defended. And indeed, in that moment, Ramesses III may have pushed back the storm. But history has a way of remembering not just victories, but the shadows within them. For if the sea peoples truly came as entire groups, then their arrival was not a mere Reddit, was a sign of collapse, of desperation, of the breakdown of worlds beyond the Nile. The pharaoh wanted his subjects to see strength, yet the carvings now reveal fragility. Egypt may have won the battle, but the world around it was unraveling. These reliefs are both propaganda and testimony, shouting triumph while quietly whispering fear. Stone tells stories differently than words. A written record can exaggerate or omit, but an image captures what the artist's eye could not fully conceal. In the carvings, we see the tension between victory and vulnerability. Ramesses wanted the sea peoples to look dangerous, yet also defeated. Still, the families carved alongside the warriors complicate the narrative. They cannot be erased, for they were cut into the very surface of eternity. And so, through accident or honesty, the Egyptian record preserved evidence of humanity that contradicts the message of simple conquest. Letters from this same time reinforce the sense of crisis. At Ugarit, a coastal city north of Canaan, a desperate king wrote to his allies, pleading for aid. His letter spoke of enemy ships arriving, of the sea itself no longer safe. "The enemy ships are already here," he wrote. "They set fire to my cities." Soon after, Ugarit fell silent. The letter, baked in clay, survived, but the city did not. It is one of history's small ironies that the words of warning remain, even as the people who wrote them vanished. The sea peoples left not just carvings, but also silences in the record, empty spaces where cities once stood. Egypt's walls give us pictures. Other lands give us absences. The combination is powerful. Where one record shows desperate families on the move, another record shows cities burning and then disappearing from history. Together, they form a pattern: migration and destruction, wandering and collapse. The sea peoples were part of both stories, woven into a crisis that reshaped the Eastern Mediterranean. To the Egyptians, they were enemies. To us, they are puzzles, fragments of evidence scattered across stone, clay, and silence. The Egyptian carvings do more than glorify Pharaoh. They invite us to imagine the soundscape of the age. Close your eyes and listen. The crash of waves against wooden hulls, the groan of oars, the cries of families huddled together. In the reliefs we see spears and arrows, but if we lean closer, we sense hunger, exhaustion, and hope hidden in each carved line. The sea peoples were not a faceless tide, they were individual souls, each carrying memories of a homeland left behind. Perhaps an island abandoned to drought, perhaps a village burned by rival kings. The Egyptians, eager to show triumph, may have missed that their own artists preserved these subtler truths. To us, they become a window into the humanity behind the conflict. Other kingdoms besides Egypt echoed this same alarm. Letters preserved from Hatti, from Cyprus, and from coastal Syria described sudden raids, strange ships, and unstoppable enemies. But the enemies were not always described as soldiers. Sometimes they were called migrants, outsiders, people arriving in groups too large to repel easily. This duality unsettles us, for it resists simple explanation. Were they driven by famine or by ambition? Were they exiles forced to violence or fighters choosing plunder? The inscriptions and letters leave room for both possibilities. Archaeologists today sift the evidence with patient care. At coastal sites destroyed around this time, they find layers of ash, broken walls, scattered tools. But alongside these marks of violence, they also find new pottery styles, strange to the region but familiar in distant lands. These clues suggest resettlement, not just destruction. Families arrived and stayed, bringing their traditions with them. The sea peoples may have been both destroyers and builders, tearing down what they could not share, yet planting roots where survival was possible. In this way, the Egyptian record, though carved in triumph, becomes more than propaganda. It becomes the first chapter of a story told in fragments across the Mediterranean. Ramesses III wanted us to remember him as the defender of order. Yet what history recalls most clearly is the shadowy presence of those he fought against. The sea peoples emerged not only as Egypt's foes, but as protagonists of their own, reshaping lands wherever they arrived. What is most haunting is how the Egyptians placed these events within their cosmic order. They believed their pharaoh maintained the balance of the world against chaos. To them, the sea peoples represented chaos incarnate, threatening to overturn the harmony of Egypt. Yet, ironically, their carvings show that chaos was not only destruction, it was change, migration, transformation. The pharaoh may have triumphed in battle, but even victory could not stop the tide of history from reshaping the Mediterranean. As you rest tonight, think of those reliefs as a dialogue across time. They do not only tell us that Egypt won, they also whisper of people in motion, families at sea, children in wagons. The Egyptians carved them as symbols of danger, yet their humanity still shows through the stone. The sea peoples were not myths, but living, breathing groups, remembered in ways their own voices never could be. In the quiet between lines, we can imagine their voices. A child asking where they will sleep, a mother calming fears, a leader promising land beyond the horizon. These voices are absent from the official record, but they echo in our imagination when we look at the wagons, the families, the figures carved beside soldiers. They remind us that behind every war record is a migration story waiting to be heard. The echoes in Egyptian stone are not the final word. They are the beginning of a puzzle that scholars still piece together today. Reliefs, letters, archaeology, and oral traditions weave together to form a tapestry. Some threads show raiders, some refugees, and some both at once. And in this gentle confusion, we find the truth. History is rarely simple, rarely one thing alone. For those lying awake tonight, let the lesson sink in softly. The sea peoples, remembered first in Egyptian records, remain as uncertain now as they were then. But within that uncertainty lies a calm acceptance that history is layered, that human movement is eternal, that the past, like the sea, holds mysteries deeper than we can sound. And so segment 2 closes, not with certainty but with reflection. We have walked beside Ramesses' temple walls, heard the letters of desperate kings, and traced the migration etched into pottery and ash. The sea peoples remain, at once invaders and exiles, destroyers and settlers. Their first echoes in Egyptian records still drift to us like waves under moonlight. Let the sound carry you gently toward rest, reminding you that every fragment of history is also a fragment of humanity. The Egyptians, careful chroniclers of their victories, left us a set of names carved into temple walls. They wrote them boldly, as if naming could tame the storm: Sherdon, Shekelesh, Peleset, Denyen, and more. Each name is like a seashell washed up from a distant shore, a fragment hinting at a story we cannot fully grasp. To Ramesses and his scribes, these names were labels of enemies, outsiders who disturbed the cosmic balance of Mat. But to us, centuries later, they are clues scattered across time. They whisper of possible homelands, perhaps Sardinia, Sicily, Crete, or Anatolia. The Egyptians did not bother to explain. They only recorded what they feared and fought. And so we, in the quiet of tonight, inherit these echoes and wonder what lives and journeys lie hidden within them. When we linger on the name Sheridan, our imagination drifts to islands. Scholars debate whether this group came from Sardinia, whether the echo of the name points toward the Western Sea. Others suggest they were mercenaries, long hired by Egyptian kings before turning restless. The reliefs show them with horned helmets, standing tall among the pharaoh's foes. Yet helmets cannot tell us hearts. Behind those horns were men, fathers, brothers, wanderers. Did they once plough rocky fields or guard island harbors before hunger or ambition pushed them east? Egypt called them invaders, but the truth may be more complicated. Perhaps they were both allies and enemies at different times, depending on circumstance, depending on need. History rarely paints with only one color, and the Sheridan remind us of that. The Shekelesh are another mystery. Their name, some suggest, may connect with Sicily, another island far to the west. Others see them as part of a larger movement, tribes pressed into the Mediterranean currents by famine or conflict. The Egyptians saw them as one more threat among many, their name carved into the lists of enemies to be defeated. But pause for a moment, and you can almost hear their voices carried across the sea. Families setting sail, guided by stars, hoping to find new coasts. Perhaps they were raiders in some places, refugees in others, caught between survival and violence. To the pharaoh, they were danger. To us, they are puzzle pieces, asking us to imagine a world where islands sent forth their children, willingly or unwillingly, into the uncertainty of waves. The Peleset hold a more familiar place in later history. Many scholars connect them to the Philistines of the Bible, who settled along the southern coast of Canaan. Archaeology supports this link, revealing pottery with Aegean designs in Philistine cities. If true, the Peleset were not merely raiders, they became settlers, leaving lasting marks on culture and conflict in the Levant. Egypt recorded them as enemies, but history shows them as neighbors, rivals, and contributors to the region's unfolding story. Their name carries weight, not just as a fleeting threat, but as a people who shaped centuries of history after their arrival. Imagine their ships landing, their families disembarking, their traditions blending with new soil. What began as invasion became habitation, a transformation captured in clay as much as in scripture. Then there are the Denyon, whose name stirs thoughts of the Homeric world. Some scholars hear an echo of the Danaans, a poetic name for Greeks in the epics. Others trace them to Anatolia or Cyprus, searching for links in language and artifacts. The Egyptians did not care where they came from. They only cared that they came. On temple walls, the Denyen are enemies, yet in our imagination, they are travelers from lands of myth, perhaps carrying songs and stories across the sea. Their name links us to Homeric echoes, to the possibility that behind Egyptian stone reliefs lies a thread connecting to later legends. A single word, carved in hieroglyphs, bridges history and poetry. Each name in the list offers both a door and a wall. A door, because it opens speculation toward homelands, migrations, and cultural ties. A wall, because it withholds certainty, refusing to tell us the full story. The Egyptians used these names to define outsiders, but we use them to seek origins. In the silence between what is recorded and what is missing, our curiosity awakens. It is in that silence that the sea peoples live most vividly, as half-seen figures moving between known and unknown. Their names are like stars partly hidden by clouds, glimpsed but not fixed. For the sleepless historian, this uncertainty is strangely calming. We are not forced to reach a conclusion tonight. We are invited to wander among possibilities. Was Sheridan from Sardinia? Was Shekelesh from Sicily? Were the Pelasets truly the Philistines, or only their distant kin? The Egyptians left us names, but not answers. In this gentle mystery, we find a rhythm suited for rest. Let your thoughts drift like ships across calm seas, considering each possibility without urgency. The act of naming was powerful for Egypt. To name was to control, to place chaos into order. By writing these names on temple walls, Ramesses declared victory not only in battle, but in narrative. He showed his people that the invaders were known, listed, tamed by the ink of hieroglyphs. But real life is never so neat. A name can hide diversity, reduce many tribes and families into a single word. Egypt may have felt safer with these labels, but we, looking back, see the oversimplification. Beneath each name lay dozens of untold stories. If you listen closely, the inscriptions seem to speak in layers. On the surface, they say, Egypt triumphed, the pharaoh is strong, chaos was defeated. Beneath that, they murmur, here were people on the move, carrying children and gods, searching for land. And beneath even that, they whisper, names cannot contain humanity, they can only hint at it. The stone bears these whispers into our own night, reminding us to listen not just to the noise of victory, but to the silence of migration. And so, as we close the first half of this segment, we hold the names like seashells cupped in our hands. They are small, incomplete, but resonant. Each name carries weight beyond its syllables. Sheridan, Shekelesh, Pelaset, Denyon. They remind us of the complexity of movement, the blending of war and refuge, the way people resist simple categories. Tonight, these names are no longer just hieroglyphs on stone. They are whispers in the dark, voices drifting to us across 3,000 years. The lists carved into Egyptian stone do not end with the few names we know best. There are others, more obscure, harder to trace, like whispers that fade before reaching our ears. Each of these groups was folded into the collective title of Sea Peoples. The Egyptians did not ask whether they were allies turned restless, or farmers turned desperate, or refugees turned warriors. They simply named them and declared them beaten. Yet for us, lying awake tonight, the names become puzzle pieces scattered across the map. Some drift westward, some eastward, some vanish into silence. And we are left with the awareness that every name we read is both a presence and an absence. Present because it was recorded, absent because the lives behind it are forever beyond reach. Consider how fragile names can be. A name carved into stone lasts longer than any life, yet it can still be misread, mistranslated, misunderstood. The Egyptians may have written Sheridan, but perhaps that word was only their approximation of what the people called themselves. How many syllables were lost in translation? How many meanings reshaped by the hand of a scribe who cared more for form than accuracy? In this, we are reminded that history is not a mirror but a lens, sometimes sharp, often blurred. We gaze through it, aware of the distortions, yet grateful for even a distorted view. When we place the names side by side, we begin to see patterns. Islands, coastlines, seafarers, they form a picture of the Mediterranean as a restless stage. Each group may have had its own reason for moving, drought, war, ambition, or curiosity. But once their ships touched the waves, they were bound together by fate. Egypt remembered them as a coalition, a tide of chaos. In truth, they were likely fragmented, sometimes cooperating, sometimes competing. Their names reflect diversity more than unity, yet history pressed them into a single category. And so we must hold both truths, the sea peoples as many, and the sea peoples as one. It is tempting to match every name neatly to a modern place. Scholars have tried for centuries, linking Sheridan to Sardinia, Shekelesh to Sicily, Peleset to Philistines, Denyan to Danaans. These connections spark debate, excitement, sometimes controversy, yet none can be proven with certainty. Perhaps that is the quiet gift of the inscriptions. They resist closure. They invite imagination. We are not meant to solve the riddle completely. We are meant to walk with it, to let it accompany us as softly as waves accompany the shore. In the hush of night, these names sound less like enemies and more like lullabies. Their syllables roll gently. Sheridan, Shekelesh, Peleset, Denyan. Say them slowly, and they lose their sharpness. They become music, echoes of people long gone, but still present in stone and memory. For sleepless historians, they are reminders that even in times of collapse, humanity leaves behind traces sometimes fierce, sometimes fragile, always enduring. The Egyptians, of course, would not have shared this softness. To them, these names were warnings carved into the walls of eternity. They told their people, "Beware, chaos came from the sea, but Pharaoh drove it back." Yet the very act of carving preserved more than propaganda. It preserved humanity, glimpsed unintentionally in wagons, children, and names that survive beyond victory. Egypt gave us enemies, but history returns them to us as neighbors from a forgotten past. Think for a moment about how you are known. Your name, spoken by family or carved in a document, carries weight, carries identity. Yet imagine if the only record of you came from your rival, your opponent, someone who wished to show your defeat. How incomplete that record would be, how distorted. So too with the sea peoples. We know them mostly through the eyes of those who fought them, and yet their names shine through even those biased accounts. This awareness should make us gentle readers of history. We do not condemn or glorify too quickly. We allow names to hold ambiguity, to resist single meanings. That is the work of the sleepless historian. Not to close the book, but to keep it open, to let the questions breathe, to let the unknown rest alongside the known. In this way, the names in Egyptian inscriptions become companions for thought, rather than puzzles to be solved once and for all. And so, as we leave this segment, imagine the temple walls by torchlight. The hieroglyphs shine faintly, the figures stand tall, the names whisper in the stone. They are ancient, yet tonight they feel near, close enough to carry into your dreams. Sheridan, Shekelesh, Peleset, Denyan, their names linger, not as threats, but as echoes, drifting softly into the quiet. Let them become part of your night, part of your rest. The Egyptians believed that to name was to preserve, to fix something against the tide of time, and in that they succeeded. For 3,000 years later, we still speak these names, still wonder at their meaning, still imagine the people who carried them. Their lives may be gone, but their syllables remain, fragile but enduring, like stars across a dark sea. And with that thought, we close this chapter, carrying the names gently into silence. Archaeology, patient and quiet, gives us another kind of testimony about the sea peoples. While Egyptian carvings shout of victory, the soil of the Aegean whispers of endings and transformations. Excavators, brushing dust from stone and pottery, find layers of ash that speak of sudden destruction. Towns that once bustled with trade and music fell silent in the 13th and 12th centuries BCE. Fires swept through palaces, leaving black scars across storerooms and courtyards. In their wake, Archaeologists uncover pottery broken mid-use, tools abandoned, meals left unfinished. It feels as if life was interrupted in a single heartbeat, frozen and buried until modern spades uncovered it again. For sleepless listeners, this is where imagination awakens. Not just battles carved in stone, but kitchens left in haste, homes never returned to, dreams abandoned in fire. The Aegean, so often celebrated for myth and epic, also tells a story of loss written in its soil. At Mycenae, the great fortress city of Greece, walls still rise in cyclopean grandeur. Yet beneath those walls, archaeologists discovered signs of sudden ruin. Storerooms, once filled with oil and grain, were scorched. The Linear B tablets, carefully inscribed with the records of palace life, ended abruptly. A bureaucracy that counted everything from livestock to textiles was silenced in a season. The same patterns appear in Pylos and Tiryns, cities that thrived and then collapsed. It is as if an entire administrative world, one obsessed with order and record, crumbled overnight. This is not the story of decline stretched across centuries, it is the story of sudden collapse. And in that collapse, we hear the possible footfalls of the sea peoples, or others like them, entering through the cracks of weakening kingdoms. Crete, long home to great Minoan and post-Minoan traditions, shows scars too. Nasus had already declined, but later settlements faced their own disruptions. Pottery styles shifted sharply from local designs to those with foreign echoes. The elegant curves of Aegean vessels gave way to sturdier, simpler forms. Some of these match the kinds of wares associated with migrants, suggesting families who carried their traditions across the sea. Archaeologists note that these changes are not just aesthetic, they reflect movement of people, not just ideas. When cooking pots change suddenly, it means new hands are preparing food, new recipes are being followed, new lives are shaping daily routines. The sea peoples may have been those new hands, settling on foreign shores while leaving traces in clay. At Ugarit, in Syria, archaeology confirmed what letters foretold. The city, once vibrant, was destroyed and never rebuilt. Houses collapsed with their goods inside. Storage jars were left full, as if no one returned to claim them. One tablet described enemies attacking by sea, and the ruins give evidence that the warning was true. The destruction was not gradual, it was catastrophic, swift, final. Archaeologists walking among the charred walls feel the silence of lives ended suddenly. Here, too, the sea peoples are suspected, though whether as raiders or desperate migrants remains unknown. What is certain is that Ugarit, like many cities of the late Bronze Age, became a ghost within a generation. The pottery record across the Aegean provides one of the most compelling threads. Styles known as Philistine ware, with roots in the Aegean, appear in Canaan after 1200 BCE. This pottery is bold, decorated, distinct from local traditions. Its presence marks not only trade but also settlement, for these vessels are domestic, used in everyday life. Cooking pots, storage jars, drinking cups, objects tied to daily rhythms, not elite exchange. Their sudden appearance in a new land speaks of families carrying habits across the sea. Archaeologists see this as one of the strongest pieces of evidence that the sea peoples were not merely raiders, but also migrants establishing new homes, weapons, to tell their story. Swords of new design appear in regions struck by upheaval. These swords are longer, sharper, better balanced, and they spread quickly across the Mediterranean. They may have originated with groups linked to the sea peoples, who carried their weapons along with their wagons and ships. The adoption of these designs suggests that conflict spread, but also that innovation traveled with it. Archaeology shows that even in destruction, new forms arise, reshaping the material culture of entire regions. War and migration together left their imprint on the metal that gleamed in battle and ritual alike. In Cyprus, the layers of archaeology show a mix of violence and renewal. Cities burned, yet new settlements rose soon after, often with different styles of architecture. The pottery, tools, and burial practices suggest a blending of cultures. Migrants may have arrived, some fleeing, some conquering, but eventually they became part of Cyprus's fabric. Here, the sea peoples might not have ended life, but reshaped it. Archaeology captures this paradox: destruction paired with rebirth, endings followed by beginnings. The island became both a victim of upheaval and a haven for survivors. The Aegean collapse was not uniform. Some sites burned and vanished, others survived and adapted. This uneven pattern suggests that the sea peoples were not a single unstoppable wave, but part of a patchwork of crises. Drought, earthquakes, rebellions, and shifting trade networks all played roles. The sea peoples may have been catalysts in some places, consequences in others. Archaeology teaches us to resist simple answers. The ruins whisper of many causes interwoven. What we call collapse may have felt, to those living through it, like confusion, fear, and constant adjustment. For the sleepless historian, archaeology offers images more haunting than inscriptions. Stone walls toppled, pottery broken mid-meal, skeletons buried under fallen roofs. These speak in ways no official record can. They are the remnants of daily life interrupted, frozen in ash and rubble. To walk among these ruins is to hear silence louder than words. And for those of us listening tonight, it is a reminder that history is not only in victories and defeats, but also in abandoned rooms and unanswered prayers. Archaeology does not give us names, but it gives us textures. It shows us the grain of wood preserved by fire, the curve of a cup once raised to lips, the print of a child's foot hardened in clay. These details may never tell us precisely who the sea peoples were, but they let us feel the world in which they moved. It is a world of fragility, where greatness could vanish overnight, and where survival meant adapting, blending, or moving on. As you drift deeper into rest, let these fragments of the Aegean remind you that history is made not only by kings and battles, but also by ordinary lives, leaving quiet traces in the earth. Archaeology also reveals the human hand behind destruction. At some sites, arrowheads are lodged in walls, suggesting desperate defense. Skeletons show wounds that speak of sudden violence. In one place, bodies were found huddled together in a room, as if seeking shelter from fire and invaders. These discoveries remind us that collapse was not abstracted, was lived, feared, and felt. Every scar in the earth represents a life once full of ordinary tasks: grinding grain, weaving cloth, telling stories by firelight. The sea peoples are implicated in these traces, whether as attackers or fellow sufferers caught in the same storm. For sleepless listeners, the weight of these details creates a gentle melancholy, a recognition of humanity beneath history's grand labels. In contrast, some layers reveal resilience. After fires, new walls rose. After destruction, pottery of mixed styles appeared, combining local traditions with foreign designs. This blending tells us that survival often required adaptation. The sea peoples, if they settled, contributed their skills and habits to the communities they joined. The archaeological record becomes a quiet dialogue between ruin and renewal. It shows that even in times of upheaval, life reasserted itself, stubborn and creative. The Aegean was not only a place of endings, but also of beginnings, each shard a sign of persistence. The Aegean world after 1200 BCE feels like a mosaic, shattered and reassembled. Some pieces are missing, others are rearranged, yet the picture remains recognizably human. Archaeology captures this process with patience. The collapse of palaces, the survival of villages, the rise of new cultures, the sea peoples moving within this landscape were part of both destruction and creation. Their presence is marked not by names but by shifts in pottery, architecture, and weapons. These are the fingerprints they left behind, silent but enduring. For scholars, the question lingers: were the sea peoples the cause or the consequence? Did they bring fire to palaces already weakened, or were they themselves driven by the same droughts and shortages? Archaeology cannot answer fully, but it provides context. It shows us that collapse was widespread, that multiple causes converged. The sea peoples were one thread in a tangled web of disaster and survival. Their story cannot be separated from the broader fabric of the late Bronze Age. As you lie awake tonight, imagine walking through an excavated ruin. The air is still, the stones are warm from the sun, and the earth carries the faint smell of ash preserved for millennia. Each step takes you deeper into lives interrupted, into halls where voices once echoed. Archaeology lets us walk among ghosts not in fear, but in reverence. These ruins remind us that history is not gone. It is layered beneath our feet, waiting to be uncovered. The Aegean collapse gave rise to what we call the Dark Age of Greece. Writing was forgotten, trade diminished, palaces lay in ruins. Yet within that darkness, seeds of future cultures were planted. Archaeology traces the slow re-emergence of villages, the return of artistry, the eventual birth of the classical world. The sea peoples, whether as settlers or disruptors, were part of this transition. Their shadow lingers in the silence between one age and the next. When archaeologists reconstruct these stories, they often work with fragments no larger than a hand. A piece of pottery, a burnt beam, a coin-shaped weight. From these fragments, entire worlds are imagined. This act of patient assembly mirrors what we do tonight, piecing together whispers into a narrative. The sea peoples, elusive as they are, remind us that even fragments can sing if we listen carefully. It is worth remembering that the past is not static. Each new discovery can shift the story. A freshly uncovered tablet, a new layer of ash, a pattern in pottery can rewrite what we thought we knew. The sea peoples remain mysterious, partly because their traces are scattered, fragile, incomplete. Archaeology does not close the case. It keeps it open, inviting us to wonder again. This openness is what makes their story so calming for sleepless minds. It allows us to drift without needing an ending. For the sleepless historian, archaeology offers the perfect balance. It grounds imagination in evidence, yet leaves space for wonder. The ruins of the Aegean invite us to walk slowly, to accept gaps, to listen for voices in silence. Each discovery is both answer and question, each artifact both familiar and strange. In this, archaeology mirrors the rhythm of night itself. Quiet, patient, unresolved, and so segment 4 closes with a reflection. Archaeology does not give us certainty about the sea peoples, but it gives us intimacy with their world. It shows us what was broken, what was carried across the sea, what was rebuilt. The Aegean, through its ruins, tells us that collapse and survival are entwined. Tonight, let those ruins become a gentle landscape in your imagination, a coastline of broken walls and rising dawns, where the sea peoples once walked, and where history still hums beneath the earth. Drought leaves no inscription on stone, yet its hand is felt across centuries. Scientists reading the language of pollen grains, tree rings, and lake sediments discover that around 1200 BCE the rains grew scarce. Harvests dwindled, fields cracked, and rivers shrank. In the Aegean and the Levant, grain became a treasure, harder to find, harder to store. Families once secure began to worry about the next meal, while kings who once feasted now faced anxious councils. A crisis of climate became a crisis of society. Imagine the silence of a field where wheat should wave, or the hollow echo in a granary once heavy with grain. For those living in that fragile age, famine was not an abstraction, it was hunger in the belly, fear in the night, worry for the children. And into this hardship came the movements we now call the Sea Peoples, perhaps driven less by ambition than by need. Egypt itself, nourished by the Nile, was not immune. In Inscriptions, pharaohs speak of sending expeditions to fetch grain from distant lands. The Nile still flooded, but less generously, less reliably. When water faltered, Egypt trembled, for its strength lay in bread. Records from the reign of Merneptah describe hunger sweeping through neighboring lands, pushing people to Egypt's borders. Some came begging for food, others came demanding it. The pharaoh could not ignore their presence. Hunger reshaped diplomacy, turning once stable relationships into fragile bargains. It is in this context that waves of migrants may have approached, not as conquerors, but as survivors. Their wagons and ships carried not just warriors, but mouths to feed, stomachs that had been empty too long. In the wider Mediterranean, signs of famine appear in letters exchanged between kings. Clay tablets recovered from Ugarit describe pleas for grain, urgent and desperate. "Send us food, or we will perish," one line reads, its wedge-shaped characters still sharp after millennia. Imagine the desperation of a ruler writing not about gold or alliances, but about bread. The Sea Peoples may have carried such desperation with them, setting sail because their own fields failed. To migrate was to hope. To raid was to survive. In famine, the line between the two often blurred. Archaeology supports these written cries. Storage jars from certain levels stand nearly empty, while signs of makeshift granaries appear where none had existed before. People were adapting, stretching food supplies as best they could. Skeletal remains show signs of malnutrition, especially among children. These physical traces confirm what the texts suggest. Hunger was widespread, enduring, and devastating. The Sea Peoples were part of this hungry world, carrying with them the marks of scarcity, moving toward places where food might still be found. Famine changes behavior. Communities that once traded peacefully may turn to raiding. Families that once stayed rooted may pack their belongings and leave. Leaders who once hosted feasts may struggle to maintain authority when their people grow restless. The collapse of late Bronze Age societies cannot be understood without this climate crisis pressing on all sides. The Sea Peoples become less of a mystery when we see them through this lens. They were people responding to hunger, not shadows descending without cause. Tree ring studies in Anatolia and the Levant show years of drought stacked one after another. These natural records, read like quiet diaries of the earth, match the timeline of upheaval. As rain failed, cities faltered. As famine spread, migrations began. Nature set the stage, and human societies reacted. The Sea Peoples, whether raiders or refugees, were among those reactions. They were not outside history, but woven into it by the threads of climate and survival. Think of the children in this time. Their parents saw harvests shrink, their bellies ached with hunger, their futures narrowed. A decision to move, to set sail, to follow rumors of fertile lands would have been made with them in mind. Pharaohs may have recorded battles, but behind those wars were families seeking food for their young. In every carved wagon and every ship drawn on Egyptian walls, there may have been stories of children carried along by famine's force. Famine also reshaped trade. Ships once heavy with copper and tin now carried grain instead, if they carried anything at all. Merchants turned from luxuries to necessities, yet even necessities grew scarce. Ports that once thrived on exchange grew tense, each community guarding its supplies. Conflict often follows scarcity, and so the hungry seas became violent seas. The sea peoples may have begun as traders turned desperate, their journeys shifting from commerce to survival raids. For sleepless historians, there is something sobering in this picture. The sea peoples were not an inexplicable mystery, they were human beings caught in a cycle of climate stress. Their movements remind us how vulnerable civilizations are to shifts in rain and sun. Modern science confirms what ancient people already knew in their bones. When harvests fail, history trembles. And so, the inscriptions of Egypt, the ruins of Ugarit, and the data from pollen and tree rings all converge. They whisper that hunger, not only ambition, drove the ships across the sea. As you rest tonight, let this thought settle gently. The sea peoples may have been both raiders and refugees, but beneath both roles lay hunger. The hunger of children, the hunger of parents, the hunger of entire communities seeking survival. Climate stress was not an invisible background, it was the tide that pushed them forward. Their story is not only one of battles, but of famine, migration, and resilience. And in that recognition, we meet them not as strangers, but as fellow humans facing forces larger than themselves. When rains failed, rituals grew louder. Temples filled with offerings, priests begged the gods for mercy, and communities prayed for clouds. Yet the skies remained stubborn. Imagine the tension of watching the horizon day after day, searching for signs of rain that never came. For ancient farmers, the land was sacred, and its silence was terrifying. Hunger became not only a physical struggle, but also a spiritual crisis. The sea peoples may have carried this desperation with them, believing new lands might offer divine favor or simply better soil. Their migration was not only an act of survival, it was also an act of faith. The inscriptions of Egypt sometimes describe outsiders arriving in groups, asking for food. These were not the words of raiders, but of beggars, weary families at the gates of empire. Some may have been granted grain, others turned away. Those rejected may have turned to violence, their hunger leaving no other path. Famine blurs lines between friend and foe. A neighbor today could become a raider tomorrow if the children are starving. This was the cruel rhythm of survival, dictated not by kings but by empty bellies. As famine spread, entire networks of trade collapsed. The Bronze Age economy depended on exchange. Tin from one land, copper from another, grain from yet another. When one link broke, the others faltered. Ships that once carried prosperity now carried despair. Communities isolated by scarcity grew weaker, easier targets for those still strong enough to fight. The sea peoples may have been both victims and opportunists, shaped by a system unraveling before their eyes. Archaeological digs show evidence of stored grain being hidden away. Families dug small pits, burying food in hopes of saving it from theft or raiding. Some of these pits still contain charred remains of wheat and barley, preserved like silent witnesses. They tell us of fear, of measures taken when trust dissolved. This climate of suspicion made migration even more urgent. for no one wanted to starve alone. Moving together in large groups gave safety, even if it also created tension with those already struggling. The famine likely reshaped identities. People who once belonged to villages or tribes may have merged into larger, mobile groups. Hunger erases boundaries, and new communities form out of necessity. The sea peoples might not have started as sea peoples at all. They may have become such only when hunger forced them together. Their identity was forged in motion, born of famine, carried on ships across the Mediterranean. For sleepless historians, there is comfort in seeing this broader picture. The sea peoples were not only destroyers of cities, they were families pushed by climate and scarcity. Their raids and migrations were chapters in a story shaped by drought, famine, and fragile harvests. Understanding this does not excuse the violence, but it softens the mystery. It reminds us that behind the carved reliefs and broken ruins were ordinary people seeking to endure. The silence of empty fields is perhaps the most haunting sound of this age. Where once harvest songs echoed, only dust remained. Where feasts had been shared, famine spread. These silences pushed people onto the sea, onto paths of risk and uncertainty. Egypt carved its triumphs, but the true story lies also in the hunger that preceded every battle. Science, with its quiet tools, confirms what history suggested. Pollen cores show drought, tree rings mark dry years. Archaeology reveals malnutrition. Each line of evidence joins to tell the same story. Climate stress and famine shaped the Mediterranean crisis. The sea peoples were not an inexplicable storm. They were part of this pattern, swept forward by forces far greater than themselves. Tonight, as you drift toward rest, imagine those empty fields beneath a hot sun. Picture families deciding to leave, to risk the sea, to carry their hopes across the waves. Hunger was their companion, but so too was resilience. They sought survival, as all humans do. Their story is one of loss and endurance, of famine and faith, of desperation and determination. And so we close segment 5. The sea peoples, often remembered only as raiders, emerge here also as refugees of climate change long before our time. Their ships carried warriors, yes, but also mothers, fathers, and children driven by hunger. The reliefs and ruins tell us of violence, but science whispers of famine. Together, they reveal a deeper truth. History is never just battles, it is also the fragile struggle for bread, for water, for life itself. The story of the sea peoples cannot be told without confronting the images of violence they left behind. On the temple walls of Egypt, battles are carved in fierce detail, ships colliding, warriors falling into the waves, Pharaoh standing triumphant. These scenes were meant to glorify Egypt, but they also capture the chaos of seaborne conflict. The sea peoples were remembered as raiders, descending upon coasts with speed and ferocity. Imagine their ships approaching a quiet harbor, sails catching the wind, oars moving in rhythm. For the villagers, the sight must have been terrifying. Smoke and fire often followed, leaving ruins where bustling markets once stood. These memories became etched into Egyptian history not as stories of refugees, but as invasions to be repelled. The letters of Ugarit, so fragile yet powerful, describe this terror. One king wrote to his ally, desperate for help, "The enemy ships are already here. They have set fire to my towns." That plea, baked into clay, survived long after his city fell silent. Ugarit was not rebuilt. Its ashes remain testimony to the suddenness of its destruction. For archaeologists, These letters confirm that the Sea Peoples were not imagined foes, but very real threats. Their raids left cities burning and kingdoms scrambling. The fear in those letters is still palpable, even across 3,000 years. The act of raiding was not new to the Mediterranean. Pirates had long prowled the seas, striking at coastal towns before vanishing into the waves. But what made the Sea Peoples distinct was their scale. They came not as scattered bands, but as large groups, entire fleets moving together. Their raids were devastating because they were coordinated, overwhelming defenses with sheer numbers. Egypt's walls portray them as a tide, wave after wave, pressing against the land. Whether hungry or ambitious, their raids shook the confidence of great powers. Raiding, however, may have been both survival and strategy. Families on the move needed supplies, food, tools, shelter. If denied, they may have taken by force. For others, raiding may have been a deliberate act of warfare, a way to weaken kingdoms before settling. Either way, the image of the Sea Peoples as raiders became fixed in the memories of those they encountered. The distinction between refugee and invader blurred, for sometimes desperation itself is violent. Archaeological evidence supports the image of raiding. Burn layers across sites in Anatolia, Cyprus, and the Levant mark destruction at the end of the Bronze Age. Weapons of new design appear suddenly, suggesting that new groups brought fresh tactics. Fortresses, once considered impregnable, crumbled, unable to withstand repeated attacks. Even in places where survivors rebuilt, the scars of raids remained clear. These destructions, clustered in time, point to a storm of conflict moving across the sea. Egypt faced this storm directly. Ramesses III recorded a great sea battle, claiming victory over the invaders. His inscriptions show ships locked in combat, Egyptian archers raining arrows upon enemy decks. The Sea Peoples are depicted with distinctive gear-feathered helmets, long swords, round shields. Even in defeat, their image was preserved with striking detail. Egypt wanted to show triumph, but by doing so, it confirmed the scale and seriousness of the threat. Consider the fear of ordinary coastal dwellers. A fisherman setting out at dawn might return to sea smoke rising from his village. Traders could find their harbors empty, their goods looted, their neighbors gone. The raids did not only strike kings and armies, they struck daily life. To those caught in them, the Sea Peoples were not mysteries, but immediate dangers. Raiding was the face by which they were most widely known, yet even in their raids, hints of migration remain. Why bring families into battle if the goal was only plunder? Why carry wagons into warships if not to resettle elsewhere? These contradictions remind us that raiding was not a single-purpose act. It may have been part of a larger journey, one in which violence and migration walked hand in hand. For the sleepless historian, this duality is the heart of the Sea People's story. Danger and desperation bound together. The Egyptian reliefs exaggerate Pharaoh's victories, but they cannot hide the truth that Egypt struggled. Resources were strained, defenses tested, borders shaken. The fact that Ramesses felt compelled to record his triumph so loudly suggests the threat was real, perhaps even terrifying. Raiding pushed Egypt to its limits, reminding it that even empires could be vulnerable to the sea's unpredictability. And so, in this part of the story, the Sea Peoples appear not as victims but as aggressors. Their raids left fire and ruin. Their ships brought fear to every coastline they touched. But even here, the lines blur. Were they raiders by choice or raiders by necessity? History records the violence, but it also hints at hunger and displacement beneath it. To hold both truths is to walk gently with the past, hearing the clash of swords, but also the quiet rumble of empty stomachs. Some scholars suggest the raids were not chaotic at all, but carefully planned. The sea peoples may have coordinated across multiple groups, striking different coasts within the same season. Their fleets were large, their movements precise, their attacks devastating. This hints at a level of organization that goes beyond mere piracy. It suggests alliances, temporary perhaps, but strong enough to shake great kingdoms. In this light, the raids look less like accidents of migration and more like campaigns, deliberate steps in a larger transformation of the Mediterranean. Still, to imagine them only as warriors is to miss the deeper truth. Their raids, however brutal, were tied to survival. The hunger described in Egyptian records, the droughts revealed in science, the migrations shown in archaeology remind us that violence often walks with desperation. The sea peoples raided because they had to, or because they saw no other path forward. In that sense, their story mirrors countless others in human history, where famine or exile pushed people into conflict. The memory of their raids lived on for centuries. In the Levant, stories of coastal invasions shaped the legends of Philistines and their neighbors. In Greece, the collapse of palatial society may have carried echoes of raids from the sea. Egypt immortalized them in stone. Across the Mediterranean, the sea peoples became symbols of disruption, remembered more for their violence than for their humanity. Yet, beneath those memories lay the reality of families searching for a place to endure. For the sleepless historian, raiding is a paradox. It is both destruction and survival, both fear and hope. To the victims, it was terror. To the raiders, it was necessity. This dual perspective allows us to hold the past with gentleness. We need not excuse the violence to understand its roots. We need only to acknowledge that raiding was one face of a deeper migration, one expression of a much larger crisis. Consider the image of ships filled with both warriors and children. Such a sight defies neat categories. It is not piracy as we usually imagine it. It is not migration as we usually define it. It is both, tangled together. To see the sea peoples in this way is to see history in its true complexity. Never simple, always layered, always human. Egypt, for all its power, could not erase the memory of these raids. Even after victories, fear lingered along the coasts. Farmers rebuilt, traders returned, but the shadow of the sea peoples haunted them. For generations, the image of invaders from the sea remained a warning. It reminded Egyptians that order was fragile, that chaos could arrive on the horizon without warning. As night falls, these raids take on a softer tone in our telling. The smoke of burning cities fades into whispers. The clash of weapons becomes the sound of waves. The sea peoples are no longer terrifying enemies, but figures in a distant dream, their violence softened by time. We can acknowledge the destruction while also hearing the quiet plea beneath it, the plea of people forced into desperate choices. Raiding reshaped the Mediterranean, leaving scars in stone and memory. Yet those scars remind us not only of loss, but also of resilience. Communities rebuilt, migrants settled, new cultures emerged. Out of violence came transformation, as painful as it was. The sea people's raids were part of this turning point, part of the end of one age and the uncertain beginning of another. Tonight, as you rest, imagine the coastline of 3,000 years ago. Fires flicker, ships pull away, and silence returns after chaos. For those who lived it, the fear was real. For us, the story is distant, softened into history. The sea peoples move on in our imagination, their raids a reminder of both danger and endurance. And so, segment 6 closes. The sea peoples, remembered as raiders, were also wanderers shaped by famine and collapse. Their ships brought fire, but they also carried families seeking survival. History records their violence, but whispers of their vulnerability remain. To walk gently with their story is to see both sides, the fear they caused and the desperation that drove them. Let this duality carry you into calm reflection, like waves ebbing against a quiet shore. When we shift our gaze from the raids, another image of the sea peoples emerges, that of weary travelers seeking new homes. On the walls of Medinet Habu, among the warriors, we see families with wagons and oxen, women carrying baskets, children clinging to their mothers. This is not a portrait of soldiers alone. It is the outline of migration. Imagine the creak of wooden wheels, the cries of infants, the steady steps of people who had left everything familiar behind. These scenes remind us that the sea peoples were not only raiders, but also refugees, carrying their lives with them into uncertainty. Migration is an ancient story, repeated across ages. Families leave when the land no longer sustains them, when harvests fail, when war makes villages unsafe. The sea peoples may have been driven by the same pressures. Drought, famine, and collapsing trade routes left many with little choice but to move. Their ships were not filled with treasure, but with household goods. Their wagons carried not weapons alone, but the tools of daily life. To see them as refugees is to restore their humanity, to acknowledge their struggle for survival. The Philistines, often linked to the Peleset of Egyptian records, may be the clearest example. Archaeology shows that around 1200 BCE, a new culture appeared on the southern coast of Canaan. Their pottery bore Aegean designs, their houses new architectural styles, their diet a blend of old and new traditions. These signs point to settlement, not mere raiding. The Peleset arrived, fought for space, and then built cities where their children grew up as locals. Refugees had become neighbors, reshaping the cultural map of the Levant. Consider the courage it must have taken to set sail with a family. The Mediterranean could be unpredictable, storms rising suddenly, ships fragile against the waves. To carry children across such risks shows not recklessness, but desperation mixed with hope. For the sea peoples, leaving may have been less dangerous than staying. Hunger and instability at home pushed them outward. The promise of fertile land pulled them forward. Their migrations were acts of survival and of faith in a future beyond the horizon. When they landed, they often met resistance. Local populations saw them as invaders, threats to resources already scarce. Conflict was almost inevitable. Yet over time, some groups were absorbed, intermarrying, trading, and contributing to local economies. Others established their own communities, adapting foreign soil into new homelands. Refugee and settler, outsider and neighbor, the sea peoples lived all these roles, depending on where they landed and how they were received. Archaeological layers tell us this story with quiet detail. At Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Ekron, Philistine cities reveal pottery styles with roots in the Aegean. At the same time, they show adaptations to local practices, blending traditions into something new. These hybrid cultures are evidence of refugees becoming part of their surroundings. Violence may have marked their arrival, but stability and integration marked their future. The sea peoples did not vanish. They transformed, carrying old identities into new lands. For sleepless historians, there is something deeply human in this picture. We see not only conflict, but resilience. Families who lost their homes found ways to rebuild. Children grew up speaking new languages, learning new customs, while still preserving echoes of their ancestors. In this, the Sea Peoples are less mystery and more mirror, reflecting the timeless patterns of migration and adaptation that continue today. Refugees often carry more than possessions, they carry memory. The Sea Peoples may have brought songs, rituals, and gods from their homelands. Over time, these blended with the traditions of their new neighbors. This cultural mixing left traces that archaeologists now uncover: figurines, altars, and inscriptions showing both foreign and local influences. In this way, migration reshaped not only geography, but also spirituality. The Sea People's search for home also reshaped belief and practice across the Mediterranean. The Egyptian inscriptions, meant to terrify, accidentally preserved this gentler image. In their desire to show enemies defeated, they also showed wagons and families, the unmistakable signs of migration. These details remind us to read history with care. Even propaganda can reveal truth if we look closely. The Sea Peoples were not faceless enemies, but displaced families, carved into stone for all time. So, when we picture the Sea Peoples as refugees, we soften the sharp edges of history. We remember that behind the shields were hungry bellies, behind the wagons were hopeful eyes. To see them this way does not erase the raids or the violence, but it adds balance. It allows us to hear the whispers of survival alongside the shouts of battle. And in those whispers, we find a story not of enemies, but of fellow humans seeking a place to call home. Settlement after migration is never simple. The Sea Peoples, once strangers on distant shores, faced the challenge of building trust with their new neighbors. Some communities resisted them fiercely, fearing scarcity and conflict. Others, perhaps equally desperate, found opportunity in alliance, trade, or intermarriage. Over time, hostility often softened, replaced by a recognition that survival required cooperation. In this way, refugees slowly became integrated into local societies, reshaping the cultural patterns of the Eastern Mediterranean. Archaeology shows this blending in daily life. Kitchens contained both Aegean-style cooking pots and local Levantine jars. Burial sites mixed traditions, combining foreign objects with local rites. These small details, easy to overlook, are powerful evidence of cultural exchange. They show that the Sea Peoples were not only takers, but also contributors. Their search for home left permanent marks on the material culture of their adopted lands. Children of the migrants became bridges between worlds. Born in new lands, they grew up with two heritages: the memories of their parents and the realities of their neighbors. Their voices may have sounded different from either side, blending accents, songs, and stories. Over generations, these children transformed outsiders into insiders, turning refugee camps into towns and temporary shelters into cities. The Sea People's story is as much about their descendants as about their arrivals. The concept of home itself changed for them. No longer tied to a single village or island, home became wherever survival and stability could be found. This fluid identity gave them resilience, allowing them to adapt quickly to new conditions. It also allowed them to carry fragments of their old worlds into new ones, blending past and present into something enduring. In this way, migration was both loss and creation, both sorrow and renewal. Refuge often requires strength as much as gentleness. To survive displacement, the Sea Peoples had to endure rejection, conflict, and scarcity. Yet they also had to nurture hope, to keep moving, to believe that somewhere beyond the horizon lay safety. This balance of struggle and hope is what makes their story resonate even now. It is a reminder that every refugee journey is marked by both hardship and courage. The Egyptian records painted them as enemies, but archaeology paints them as neighbors. Between these two perspectives lies the truth. They were both. They fought and settled, destroyed and rebuilt, frightened and inspired. Their dual role as raiders and refugees is not a contradiction but a reflection of human complexity. Migration, after all, often carries both conflict and compromise in its wake. For sleepless historians, the image of the Sea Peoples as refugees is a gentle one. It allows us to rest with the thought that even in times of collapse, people sought connection, safety, and continuity. The wagons carved in stone remind us that survival is not only about battles, but about family, about carrying loved ones toward hope. That quiet detail is enough to soften the harshest accounts. Imagine one of their camps at night. Fires glowing, children drifting to sleep, elders telling stories of the lands they left behind. Around them, new landscapes waited, unfamiliar but filled with possibility. This is the human side of the Sea People's journey. Moments of tenderness amid turmoil, small acts of continuity amid chaos. To hold this picture is to see them not only as forces of history, but as families like our own. The Sea People's migrations remind us that home is not always a fixed place. Sometimes it must be remade, rebuilt, or reimagined. Their story teaches us that even in displacement, there is resilience. They carried their cultures with them, and in blending with others, created something new. Out of loss came continuity, out of exile came survival. And so, segment 7 closes. We have seen the Sea Peoples not only as raiders, but as refugees. Their wagons and ships carried more than weapons, they carried families, memories, and hope. To remember them this way is to see the humanity behind the history. It is to understand that migration is not only about departure, but also about arrival, about creating new homes when old ones are lost. And in that gentle truth, their story becomes a mirror of resilience, one that continues to speak softly across the centuries. They are called Pelesets in Egyptian lists. Yet, many know them later as the Philistines, and their story guides our puzzle tonight. Picture a shoreline under moonlight, waves combing the sand near Ashkelon, with fires glowing beyond dunes. Archaeologists speak of new pottery and kitchens, of recipes and rituals arriving, yet our pace stays unhurried. We ask softly, were these settlers the same people carved upon Egyptian stone, or a mosaic of households gathered from many coasts? Hold that question like a shell to your ear and listen. In these towns, daily life left signals, clues of beginnings, bowls with unfamiliar curves, hearths shaped differently, tastes mingling, memory and adaptation. A neighborhood forms as smoke lifts in evening air. You can hear chopping boards, grinding stones, lullabies, and laughter by doorways. Whatever banners once flew on ships are folded now. The night belongs to families learning new streets. Let the surf be a metronome for breathing, and let the word Philistine soften into persons, into names, into questions. We are not here to argue. We are here to walk through their traces, and to rest while history speaks softly. Begin with the pottery, because kitchens remember what politics forget. In coastal towns linked to the Philistines, archaeologists uncover vessels with shapes and painted rhythms that echo the Aegean, yet slowly adopt local habits. Bowls flare outward like petals, jars carry bands, and cooking pots favor thicker walls suited to different fires. These are not trophies. They are tools, stacked near hearths beside grindstones and baskets. A family's table leaves a truer diary than a palace mural. You can imagine stews simmering low, bread rising under cloth, and herbs bruised between fingers. If trade alone explained these designs, the vessels would cluster in elite rooms, but they appear in houses where children reach for cups and elders teach recipes. That is why pottery matters here. It says migration without shouting, settlement without proclamations. It carries memory in clay, techniques learned long ago, adapted to new stoves and new fuel. Let the word pottery become a lullaby, steady as your breath. Bowls and jars are storytellers, content to speak softly. Their message tonight is simple and human. People arrived, cooked, ate, and stayed, and their habits shaped neighborhoods. Now walk into a modest house, rebuilt after troubled years, and look for the quiet signatures of new life. There is a courtyard for light, a small oven set against a wall, a plastered bench, storage jars lined along a strip of floor. In one corner stands a hearth shaped in a way not common before, its edges raised to cradle pots over coals. Hooks and loom weights hang nearby, hinting at weaving in the shade while bread bakes and children drowse. Architecture here is not grand. It is practical, shaped by habit and comfort, shaped by evenings of conversation. When people migrate, they bring not only tools, but room layouts, corners for cooking, directions for doors to face the breeze. Archaeologists trace these habits like fingerprints left in mud. If designs repeat from distant coasts, the echo refuses to fade. A house tells you where a family lingered, where they slept, where they kept water cool, and where a grandmother chose to sit at dusk. Listen to that room. It says, we came across water, we learned the streets, we carried comforts, and we built with steady hands. Another line of clues comes from the table itself, from bones and seeds and ash sifted with patient brushes. Menus change when migrants settle. Fisherfolk teach inland neighbors the flavor of smoked catch, while farmers introduce stews thickened to stretch grain. Olives, grapes, lentils, and herbs mingle with coastal fish and breads baked on different surfaces. In some layers, refuse heaps grow more varied, as if new preferences joined old routines. Archaeologists catalogue these scraps carefully because diets speak without rhetoric. When the evening meal shifts, identity shifts with it, persuasively. Imagine a courtyard where two grandmothers compare spices, one from across the water, another born beside these streets. They trade methods: how long to soak, when to stir, which fire runs steady at night. Children listen, tasting histories without knowing their names. If our question is whether the Philistine story is a chapter of migration, the kitchens answer in soft voices. They say people lived here long enough to forget old schedules and invent new ones, long enough to plant, harvest, share. Food remembers when inscriptions fall silent, and tonight its memory is nourishing and clear. Maps of the southern coast show a string of towns often mentioned together, a loose constellation guiding our thoughts tonight. Ashkelon faces the sea with broad beaches. Ashdod sits near routes inland. Ekron grows where fields are kind. Gath rises by roads to hills. Gaza watches caravans moving south. Whether every place held newcomers at once is less important than the pattern they formed. Taken together, the towns feel like a network that could shelter migration, supply fleets, and exchange skills. Markets thrive where sea lanes and land paths cross. Here barters for there, fish for grain, oil for timber, wool for tools. When families arrived by ship, such nodes offered work and protection, and in turn absorbed new habits into daily life. Imagine morning noise, donkeys, carts, voices, bargaining, the thud of sacks on thresholds, children weaving between baskets. Even after hard seasons, a city's heartbeat returns in these ordinary sounds. In this puzzle, the Philistines are not singular. They are shaped by towns, docks, and roads that gather many strands. So breathe with the surf, and picture the coast not as a line, but as a braid. The word Philistine feels firm on the tongue, yet identity in daily life is softer than a label. A merchant might call himself by a village name, a sailor by a ship, a child by a street where games are played. People hold many selves at once, and migration rearranges them like furniture carried into a new room. Some titles appear in later records, but the truest identity grows in kitchens, courtyards, and workshops. It grows where neighbors share tools, where dialects mingle at wells, where festivals borrow songs from both sides of a market. If newcomers arrived here, their identity likely shifted quickly, tying old memories to new routines. The puzzle is not whether a single origin explains every piece, but how many origins could live together without breaking. That is why the gentlest reading of evidence matters tonight. We picture names, we picture families, and we let the word Philistine mean a community in motion rather than a fixed mask. In that picture, anxiety softens, and the story hums like wind over grass. Temples shift calendars, markets learn new measures, scribes note new surnames, and belonging settles where newcomers meet long-settled neighbors. Tension and negotiation weave the daily fabric. Scarcity can sharpen suspicion, yet markets pull hands together, and wells gather voices every morning. Some days, the conversation is wary. Other days, it bends toward agreement. A lane to share, a field to rent, a tax to accept. Marriage ties appear, forging bridges, one household at a time. Crafts travel as apprentices, learn from masters who speak with different tones. Fishing methods shift. Weaving patterns borrow unfamiliar borders. If the Philistines arrive in waves or trickles, they still faced this same patient work of belonging. A treaty written on a tablet matters, but 1,000 casual favors matter more. Borrowed tools returned clean, bread passed over a wall, watchmen warning one another when clouds look wrong. In the long view, such gestures outlast edicts. They are how towns recover after hard seasons, and how a name once used for strangers becomes another way to say neighbor. Festival days bring shared stalls of oil, figs, and cloth. Shrines receive quiet gifts. Roads are mended together, and children trade names in games, forgetting who arrived first. By night, texts enter the picture cautiously, like lamps set along a path after dusk. In later centuries, names for peoples and places become more frequent, but names alone rarely capture everyday nuance. A scribe listing towns may write elegantly, while knowing little of kitchens, nurseries, or workshops. That is why the puzzle of the Philistines asks for two ways of seeing at once: words and things, ink and soil. Where inscriptions mention a people, artifacts show how they lived. Where artifacts hint at origins, texts show how neighbors described them. Between these witnesses, a picture forms slowly, resisting slogans. Perhaps the language of the street braided terms from several shores. Merchants favor loanwords that smooth bargaining, nurses keep lullabies that ignore borders, and craftspeople coin nicknames for tools that fit the hand. If a scribe wrote Philistine with confident strokes, the potter may have called a neighbor by a simpler name. Let the two records sit together kindly. Together they steady us, and we do not hurry. One preserves labels, the other preserves life, and both belong to the same coastline where lanterns glow and the sea breathes evenly. Debate gathers naturally around origin stories, because beginnings feel like anchors in a restless sea. Scholars map the word Peliset beside many coasts, propose routes through islands and capes, and weigh likenesses in artifacts. Some emphasize Western hints, others prefer links east and north. Many imagine a mixture assembled by hardship and chance. For our night walk, we do not need to choose. We simply hold the possibilities like lights across the water. What matters for the Philistine puzzle is not one birthplace, but the way many people turned arrival into routine, a marketplace that clients trust, a key cleared after storms, a field sown on time. These are proofs as strong as any inscription. And when conflict cooled, the steady work of neighbors continued, knitting streets together. In that weaving, origins become less visible than relationships. So breathe with the tide, and let certainty loosen. Potsherds, house plans, tools, and seeds keep speaking, while ledgers and letters murmur beside them, inviting patience rather than verdicts. We walk through their company, so the Philistine puzzle is less a riddle to solve than a shoreline to walk, slowly, hand over hand. Pottery, houses, meals, tools, and names shine like small lamps, showing human lives adapting to new ground. Egyptian reliefs remember conflict. Local deposits remember routines. Together they make a picture that neither could hold alone. If newcomers settled here, they did so the way most people do, by waking early, by working, by teaching children the paths between home and market. The label Philistine may be ancient, but the steps are familiar. You can hear them now, light against the stones, matched to the pulse of surf. Let that rhythm steady your breath and ease your shoulders. We will keep the questions open, keep the light low, and keep our language kind. When morning comes, interpretations can argue. Tonight, evidence can rest together without friction, like boats moored along a calm quay. Let curiosity guide us, not hurry or certainty. And as you drift, know that the story continues in the next segment, where the puzzle meets wider maps. But for now, we honor this coast and its quiet homes. Temples in Philistine towns provide another key to the puzzle. Excavations at Ekron reveal sacred spaces built with features not common in neighboring Canaanite shrines. Broad halls with central pillars, benches along walls, and hearths near altars point toward Aegean influence. Yet offerings found there royal, grain, and figurines echo local traditions. The blend suggests a people negotiating identity, not abandoning old gods, not rejecting new ones, but weaving them together. Religion is always intimate, carried in gestures as small as lighting a lamp. Imagine a mother teaching her child to bow, a priest lifting oil to flame, neighbors whispering prayers in accents from different coasts. These acts, multiplied day by day, created a hybrid faith that tied migrants to their new world while remembering their old. The temples remind us that migration is never just physical. It is spiritual, reshaping rituals as surely as it reshapes streets. Language remains one of the most elusive parts of the Philistine puzzle. Very few inscriptions survive, but those that do reveal hints of complexity. Some names and words appear Indo-European in origin, pointing to ties with the Aegean. Others are clearly Semitic, showing how quickly the newcomers absorbed local speech. Over generations, the blend became seamless, until the Philistines spoke the languages of their neighbors fluently. Yet faint echoes of foreign sounds lingered, like accents passed down through lullabies. To imagine their speech is to imagine markets filled with layered voices, some sharp, some soft, all learning to harmonize. Language adapts more swiftly than stone, but it carries memory in syllables long after migrations fade. Trade strengthened their foothold in the Levant. Excavations at Philistine sites uncover weights, seals, and imported goods, evidence of commercial life. These cities became hubs where inland farmers, desert caravans, and seafarers met. The newcomers were not isolated. They were participants in a larger economy, shaping it as much as they were shaped by it. Their markets offered more than survival, they offered prosperity. This economic vitality explains why the Philistine cities endured, becoming powers in their own right. For sleepless historians, the lesson is gentle. Refugees can become builders, not only of homes, but of networks that connect entire regions. Conflict, however, remained part of their story. Biblical texts remember them as adversaries, and battles surely scarred the relationships with neighbors. Yet even these conflicts reveal their established presence. To be remembered as an enemy is to be recognized as significant. The Philistines were not fleeting visitors. They were permanent actors in the theater of the ancient Levant. Their resilience made them both rivals and partners, feared and necessary. This duality is at the heart of the Philistine puzzle. Invaders in memory, neighbors in reality. Over time, their distinctiveness faded. By the first millennium BCE, Philistine culture blended further into the regional mosaic. Their pottery lost its sharp Aegean flair, their language merged, their gods adopted local names. They became part of the Levantine fabric, no longer strangers but one thread among many. This fading is itself part of the puzzle. Migration produces distinctiveness, but generations soften differences, weaving them into broader identities. The Philistines remind us that no culture remains static. All shift with time. For archaeologists, each potsherd and inscription is a clue, but for us tonight, they are reminders of humanity in motion. The Philistines were not simply villains of scripture. They were survivors, migrants, settlers, and contributors. Their puzzle is not only about where they came from, but also about how they lived once they arrived. And in that living, they transformed both themselves and the lands they entered. Imagine sitting in a Philistine courtyard at dusk. The smell of bread drifts from the oven. Children chase one another across the stones. Elders discuss trade while neighbors water plants. The scene is ordinary, yet behind it lies an extraordinary journey across seas and centuries. This ordinariness is the real answer to the puzzle. Migration ends not in mystery, but in routine, in the rhythms of daily life that make survival possible. The Philistine puzzle soothes us because it resists a single conclusion. Were they raiders, settlers, or refugees? The evidence says they were all three. Their identity cannot be reduced to one role, one label, or one story. To honor their past is to hold the complexity gently, to accept that they were many things at once. History often demands answers, but here it offers only possibilities. And in that openness, we find a calm reminder. Not all puzzles must be solved. As you breathe with this thought, let the Philistines drift into the background like a shoreline fading in twilight. Their pottery, temples, and markets remain, but the noise of conflict is softened. What lingers is the image of families who endured, who carried fragments of one world into another, who turned exile into belonging. That is the heart of their puzzle. The quiet endurance of humanity whispered across time. And so segment 8 closes. The Philistines, born from migration, remembered as rivals, revealed themselves also as neighbors and builders. Their story is a tapestry of origins and outcomes, woven with threads of survival. Tonight, let that tapestry wrap around you like a blanket, soft and steady, reminding you that history, even when complex, can offer comfort in its continuity. Historians approach the sea peoples the way careful sailors approach a fog-bound harbor, slowly, with lamps held low. Each scholar brings a light: inscriptions, pottery, climate data, ship design, settlement layers, and the shoreline emerges only when many lights overlap. Egyptian reliefs shout of victory, but archaeology whispers of migration. Letters plead for grain, while stratigraphy shows fires that were sudden and final. To weigh these voices fairly is to accept that evidence arrives with different volumes. Stone is loud, ash is quiet, pollen is almost silent, yet together they form a choir that refuses a single melody. Some historians emphasize raiding coalitions, others foreground refugee caravans. Many see both, braided by drought and trade collapse. The task is not to crown one cause, but to balance competing signals without forcing agreement. Tonight, we walk with those historians, unhurried, letting each source speak in its own accent. If certainty recedes, gentleness advances, and in that gentleness the sea peoples become less a verdict and more a conversation carried across 3,000 years. One line of argument begins with the staging of Egyptian propaganda. Ramesses' scenes at Medinet Habu magnify royal triumph, scaling enemies larger than life to polish the crown. Historians note how pharaohs routinely framed chaos as foreign and order as Egyptian, a ritual of inscription as much as a record of events. When we weigh that bias, the battle panels still matter, but their meaning softens at the edges. The ships, helmets, and prisoners attest to real conflict. The grandeur of composition advertises legitimacy. A fair reading neither rejects the reliefs nor swallows them whole. It asks what such art must include to persuade boats, bound captives, marching files, and what it can omit without penalty: wagons with children, oxen, and household goods. The balance tilts toward a mixed scene: combat in the foreground, migration in the margins. By naming the frame, historians keep the picture from dictating the story. In the hush of night, that simple caution becomes an anchor, steadying us against waves of certainty. Another line weighs household archaeology over royal narrative. Kitchens remember what palaces forget: ovens, cooking stands, residue in jars, bones in middens, loaned recipes baked into clay. When the material record flips abruptly in coastal Aegean-style pottery, altered hearth placement, new storage habits, historians infer that people, not just pots, moved. This inference gains strength because domestic assemblages are hard to fake at scale. Trade can scatter luxury bowls, but only settlement rewrites worktops and fire circles. Critics reply that styles travel faster than families, yet the clustering of features across multiple cities argues for resettlement. The balance here is method: weigh style diffusion against population movement, and privilege the explanation that best fits the density and context of finds. In many quarters, the household evidence tips the scale toward newcomers who cooked, mended, and slept in those rooms. The verdict stays gentle: raiders may have arrived, but settlers stayed. Night accepts that both can be true, sequenced in weeks or years. Climate data enters like a quiet witness with long memory. Tree rings, speleothems, and pollen cores point to extended drought around 1200 BCE. A stress horizon matching layers of destruction and abandonment. Historians who weigh this evidence see hunger as a prime mover, caravans thinning, granaries failing, diplomacy turning to grain loans, and finally, movement by land and sea. The balance shifts when natural archives align with textual pleas from Ugarit and administrative ration records gone lean. Against this backdrop, raids look less like pure opportunism and more like survival tactics braided with forced migration. Skeptics caution against monocausal climate explanations, and they are right. Drought is a stage, not the play. But when the stage tilts, actors stumble similarly across regions. Weighing the climate witness does not absolve violence, it contextualizes desperation. In A Gentle History for Sleep, that context removes the mask of monstrosity and replaces it with the face of risk. Method matters, and historians argue about it with care. Do we privilege the latest radiocarbon calibration or trust relative pottery phases refined over decades? Do we model seaborne networks as small world graphs vulnerable to cascading failure, or read Inscriptions, genre by genre, attentive to tropes? The balance is not won by louder tools, but by transparent reasoning. Good studies declare their uncertainties, error bars, sample sizes, posterior probabilities. In that honesty, confidence becomes soft rather than brittle, and disagreement becomes collaboration rather than fracture. For the Sea Peoples, this means presenting multiple, testable stories, coordinated raiding leagues, chain migration flotillas, mercenary bands, switching patrons, coastal resettlement after initial strikes. Night welcomes a menu of plausible paths, letting listeners rest before any single path is crowned. Equifinality, different roads to the same ruin challenges simple waiting. A burn layer could mark siege, civil revolt, earthquake, fire, or accident under drought. A population dip might reflect flight, famine, mortality, or administrative decentralization that left fewer records. Historians mitigate this by stacking proxies. Burn plus trauma bones plus arrowheads in walls argues battle. Burn without trauma near a fault argues quake. Burn plus pantry swept clean argues looting. The scale tilts only when multiple signs lean together. For the Sea Peoples, multi-proxy stacks most often support mixed scenarios. Raids striking weakened towns while some groups arrive to stay. Balance, then, is not a midpoint compromise. It is convergence across independent clues. In that convergence, confidence grows quietly, like dawn edging a horizon. Bias runs both ancient and modern. Pharaohs flattered gods. Poets loved enemies. Later nations coveted ancestries. Modern media prefers headlines. Historians weigh these biases by asking, who benefits from this version? Invaders from the sea flatters a savior king. Noble refugees flatters modern sympathies. The balance holds by resisting both flattery and cynicism. It keeps people at the center. Women with baskets, men with oars, children with sleep-heavy eyes, and lets categories remain provisional. When evidence shifts, labels may shift gently too. In that ethical balance, the past becomes a place for care, not conquest. Scale is a final weight on the beam. Small pirate bands can harry coasts, but wagons and family clusters imply thousands. Logistics, water, fodder, sailcloth, carpenters must be counted alongside swords. Historians who run these sums find that only networks, not isolated ships, sustain months-long movements. That pushes the balance toward confederations or serial waves, not lone raids. It also explains why impacts were uneven. Where defenses were tight or harvests held, waves broke. Where cracks had widened, waves entered. Balance, again, is geography meeting demography. When the arguments settle for the night, a tempered picture remains. The Sea Peoples were likely multiple groups, some striking hard, some asking entrance, many doing both across seasons. Climate pressed, trade frayed, palaces stumbled, and seas carried choices no one wanted to make. Historians weigh these strands and keep two truths in hand. Violence happened, and so did resettlement. Neither cancels the other. Together they make the human shape of the story. In that shape, fear and hunger sit side by side, and history refuses to shout. So the balance is a craft, not a slogan. It honors inscriptions without obeying them, trusts kitchens without romanticizing them, reads drought without worshipping it, and accepts uncertainty without paralysis. The sea peoples emerge from that craft as people in crisis, sometimes dangerous, sometimes in danger, always entangled with a collapsing age. Let that balanced image be the pillow under your thoughts. Firm, calm, supportive, never hard. We will carry it forward, gently, into the next segment, where reflection turns toward closing and rest. Historians also weigh silence itself. There are gaps, decades, where inscriptions fall quiet, where no letters survive, where archaeology shows hiatus rather than catastrophe. Some argue these gaps reflect decline so deep that writing and administration collapsed. Others see them as evidence of simpler life continuing without palaces. The balance here requires restraint. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, yet it is not meaningless either. Silence speaks, but softly, and historians must not make it shout. In the story of the sea peoples, silence suggests that their impact was uneven, loud in some places, barely audible in others. To sleep beside such silence is to accept that history, like night, often holds more quiet than noise. Another tension lies between regional and global frames. Some scholars stress local stories. A city falls, a village shifts, a harbor empties. Others map the whole Mediterranean, showing chains of collapse rippling outward. The balance is to honor both scales. The granary in Ugarit mattered to one family, and the tin route from Anatolia mattered to many kingdoms. The sea peoples appear differently at each scale: pirates at the village level, migrants at the coastal level, catalysts in the global view. All are true within their frames. Balance means resisting the urge to collapse scales into one picture. Ethics plays a role too. To cast the sea peoples only as destroyers risks repeating the propaganda of their enemies. To cast them only as victims risks romanticizing hardship and ignoring violence. Historians weigh with care, knowing that how we tell ancient stories shapes how we see migration and refugees today. Balance, then, is not just scholarly, it is moral. It asks us to describe the past with honesty and compassion, even when certainty eludes us. Technology offers new weights. Ancient DNA, residue analysis, satellite imaging, and climate modeling bring fresh data to old debates. Each discovery tilts the balance slightly, sometimes correcting, sometimes complicating. The historian's role is to prevent any single method from claiming the whole scale. Balance requires letting every tool speak, then integrating them gently. For the sea peoples, this means DNA might confirm mobility, while shipwrecked cargoes confirm trade stress, and pollen confirms drought. The puzzle becomes richer, not simpler. For sleepless historians, there is comfort in watching this weigh-in. It is not a courtroom demanding verdicts, but a kitchen table where evidence is laid out, tested, and tasted. Some pieces are strong, others fragile, all needing context. The act of weighing itself is calming. It replaces urgency with patience, doubt with curiosity, noise with dialogue. To rest in this process is to rest in the hum of scholarship, which, like the sea, never stops moving but never rushes either. In the end, balance does not erase mystery. The sea peoples remain partly hidden, partly revealed. But balance prevents distortion, keeping us from seeing them as monsters or saints. It leaves them human, caught in storms of famine, war, and hope. That is enough for history. Not to know all, but to know enough to honor. Balance gives them dignity and gives us peace, so the scales rest lightly tonight. Egyptian inscriptions on one side, archaeological kitchens on another, climate graphs, DNA, rebellions, and ruins filling the pans. None outweighs the rest. Together they hover, trembling, steady. The sea peoples remain mysterious, but they are balanced now, neither heavier nor lighter than their age. That equilibrium is the historian's gift, and your lullaby. Let the image of balance stay with you as you drift. A scale held steady, a beam level, pans quiet. Evidence resting, questions suspended, nothing urgent. The sea peoples move softly in that balance, no longer demanding verdicts, only recognition. Their story weighs just enough to hold your attention, not enough to disturb your sleep. And so segment 9 closes in stillness. Historians weigh the balance, and the balance itself becomes the lesson. History is not about certainty, but about care. To hold many truths gently is wiser than to clutch one truth harshly. May that gentleness steady your thoughts as you settle into rest, knowing the past is complex, but complexity can be calming when carried well. We have walked a long shoreline together, listening to stone and soil, to letters and silence, and to the slow breath of the sea. Now, as night deepens, we set our questions down beside us, like smooth pebbles. The sea peoples are no longer a blur of helmets and oars. They are people, imagined gently, moving through seasons of fear and hope. Refugees, raiders, or both. The labels flutter like sails, useful at times, never the whole voyage. What remains is the human thread tying shattered palaces to rebuilt kitchens, drought-struck fields to markets waking after fire. In this hush we remember how fragile order can be, how quickly maps ripple, and how tenderly families carry their worlds from one shore to another. Let the water speak the last lines tonight. It says, "Move when you must, mend when you can, rest when you are able." If answers do not settle, that is all right. Mystery can be a blanket too, warm enough for sleep. Breathe in the salt air of imagination, breathe out the day's noise, and trust the tide to keep time. Here, questions loosen their grip, and kindness steadies the mind until the horizon softens. Sleep well. In Egyptian carvings we saw victory posed like a play, spears and ships frozen at the moment of triumph. Yet even there, in the corners, wagons rolled and children glanced back toward fading shores. In household ruins we traced ordinary courage, ovens rebuilt, recipes adapted, tools repaired after ashes cooled. Climate left pale handwriting in rings and pollen, while letters broke our hearts with pleas for grain and safety. None of these voices shouted alone. Together they hummed a low song about endurance. Perhaps that is the lesson of this age. Collapse sounds loud, recovery sounds quiet. It measures itself in chores resumed, neighbors trusted, paths relearned at dawn, lullabies remembered before sleep. Tonight we honor that quiet work, the patient tying of days that stitches lives after storms. Let grand words loosen and hold instead the small ones: bread, water, shelter, mercy. The sea peoples drift past our thoughts like lanterns in mist, while the shoreline, at last, grows calm again. Breathe steadily, count the waves, and let uncertainty loosen its knots. Kindness tends the harbor. Patience trims the sail. Hope keeps the watch until morning light. Let gentle history hold you while the tide breathes in time to night softly. If you listen carefully, history's pulse slows to match your breathing, and the room grows kind. Each inhale lifts a sail. Each exhale lowers an anchor, steady and sure. We have weighed inscriptions without bowing to them, welcomed archaeology without worship, let science move like moonlight on a jar. Where the sources disagreed, we waited, and in waiting learned modesty, the quiet courage of not rushing. Perhaps the surest truth is the one that does not shout. It arrives like dawn, patient and gentle. In that light, the sea peoples appear as kin from another century, trying to keep children fed and elders safe. We leave them there with undemanding dignity, and that is enough tonight. Let the mind uncoil, let the shoulders settle, let the breath find its easy path. Nothing urgent remains, only the long tide working faithfully beyond the breakwater, unhurried and calm. You are allowed to rest here, among questions that have learned to whisper. Trust the night to carry what daylight could not finish today. Let compassion, not certainty, be the compass that stays bright. When morning comes, answers may stretch their limbs. For now, kindness keeps watch. Sleep softly within history's quiet room tonight. Think of a campsite after a long crossing, the pot ticking softly, while sparks lift into the dark. A blanket lies near a cart. Stars rehearse their ancient roots above a quiet shore. No one speaks of empires here. They speak of morning weather, the nearest well, and mending a sandal before the road resumes. This is how the world continues after endings, not with proclamations, but with tasks that tie today to tomorrow. The sea peoples, whatever else we name them, moved inside this rhythm and survived by it. Empires remember battles, families remember meals, and both memories deserve a place by the fire. Tonight we remember both, and choose a gentler balance where spectacle and silence share the story. Let the kettle's slow breath become your own, steady and unhurried. Let small chores folding thought, straightening worry stand in 4 banners and drums. The shore grows tender under moonlight, and the path ahead is patient. Nothing urgent presses your hands tonight. You may set burdens down and let the sea keep time for you. When you rise again, the simple work will wait, faithful as stars. Let quiet carry you forward, step by step, until morning opens kindly for you. You may wonder what certainty we carry away from this long, careful wandering beside the sea. Only this: movement is old, hunger persuasive, coasts doorways as well as walls. We do not need to decide whether the sea peoples were more refugee than raider, more neighbor than conqueror. We need only admit that desperation and daring can share a single boat, and often did. In admitting it, we make a little room for compassion for the displaced, the besieged, and ourselves when maps bend. Let compassion be the final instrument in this orchestra, low and steady, never startling. Its note holds long enough for sleep to find you where certainty could not. Tonight, let generous interpretation soften sharp outlines and leave dignity intact. Let the mind set down verdicts and pick up patience like a lantern for the path. The water keeps its promises. The horizon keeps its distance. Rest keeps its quiet watch. Breathe with the tide, slow and even, until thoughts unclench and drift. Kindness can be practiced in the dark, as simple as easing the jaw and softening the brow. You have done enough for today. Let sleep gather gently, like sails folding home in evening wind now. If history keeps you awake, let its scale shrink to something you can hold. a shard that fits a palm, a line of script curving like a reed, a footprint set in clay. These are proofs that life persisted when systems failed, opposite of panic, evidence of care. The sea peoples touched these same textures, clay, rope, grain, salted. The textures answered with patience. Let patience, not certainty, be your pillow now, cool and reliable. The questions may wait at the doorway, quiet watchmen who respect sleep. They will keep their place until morning light invites them in again. Between now and then, only breath and tide are necessary. Let worries stack like folded nets. Let thoughts drift like distant lanterns across gentle water. Nothing more is required of you in this hour. Trust the smallness of details to steady the mind. Grain lines on pottery, the soft glaze of handling, soot halos above an oven, the weave of a basket's rim. These particulars are anchors when horizons feel too wide. Hold one gently, name it kindly, and let it carry you toward rest. Sleep arrives quietly when attention settles, like silt in clear water after distant storms. Trust that rhythm. What began as a list of strange names has become a circle of familiar faces by the fire. Sheridan, Shekelesh, Peliset, Denyen. Once they sounded like storms. Now they sound like neighborhoods, kitchens, shrines. We still do not know everything, and we do not need to. Knowing enough to honor is enough. They were here, they mattered, they changed and were changed. Let their ships rise and fall on the long breadth of the sea without mooring at our certainty. The water is wide, the night is kind, and both can be true. We can let them drift beyond our reach, bearing dignity unclaimed and undescribed. Meanwhile, we keep a modest watch, tending embers, listening for quiet lessons that travel well. If memory returns tomorrow, it will find you rested, ready to listen again. Tonight, the story may sleep too, curled like rope on a deck. Let gratitude be the closing line, soft as linen over shoulders. Thank the sources for their fragments, thank the gaps for their humility, thank the sea for its patience. Gratitude lightens cargo, loosens knots, and steadies sleep. Hold that feeling close, and let the tide rock the night gently beneath your breathing until morning smiles. Before we part, look once more at a calm horizon where water meets sky like a quiet promise. No fleets advance, no fires bloom, only a line that keeps steady time for thought and rest. Civilizations will tremble and reform. People will move when ground fails. The world will keep its patient turning. Between those truths lies the work of mercy, making room, mending nets, sharing bread, protecting the weary. If the sea peoples teach anything through their tangled traces, perhaps it is simply that mercy outlasts maps. Maps must be redrawn. Mercy is redrawn on us, line by careful line. Carry that into sleep as a lantern with a steady wick, shaded against wind. Let it warm your breathing and ease your shoulders until worry thins. The shore will be there tomorrow. So will kindness, if we tend it. Tonight, we practice tending by resting well. Close the ledger of arguments and open the small book of care. Turn its pages slowly. Water, shelter, safety, listening, bread. These are simple entries, yet they balance empires in the long accounting of time. Let mercy be the harbor light, unwavering, modest, guiding ships and thoughts through ordinary, forgiving water at night. And if you feel the need to place a stone upon this story, choose a small one, smooth and pocket-warm. Not a monument, simply a marker that says, I listened, I cared, I stayed. I did not solve, but I kept watch while the sea spoke and the ruins rested. I let the names pass without tightening them into a fist, and that was kindness enough tonight. Kindness is sturdy, travels well, weighs little, and outlasts many proclamations. Carry it home like bread, break it gently, share it widely. It will not answer every question, yet it will steady your hands for better work tomorrow. Let that be the closing rite, simple and humane. Then bow to the horizon, thank the witnesses, and close the lamp. The dark can be friendly when the heart is unafraid. Rest is not retreat. It is readiness gathered quietly, like rope coiled for morning. In sleep, questions tire and lose their edges. In waking, answers return kinder. Trust that rhythm and let the shoreline keep your place. Sleep will come like a tide across flat sand, unhurried, complete, leaving brightness behind for morning footsteps to find. Let that promise hold you until dawn. Now we lower the lamp and let the shore fall back into shadow, the oars into silence, the mind into ease. Sleeping or waking, you are accompanied by long human company, the anxious, the brave, the lost, the arriving. Their ships drift beyond our reach, and that is all right. We do not need to catch them. We only needed to see them clearly once, as people in a difficult season, and offer a little grace. The rest is tide work, and the tide knows what to do without instruction. Let it sweep the day smooth while you breathe, steady as lantern light in a window. If dreams come, let them be harbors. If they do not, let quiet be enough. Either way, the sea keeps watch, and morning will arrive on schedule. Close your eyes, loosen your jaw. Thank your heart for its faithful labor. The night is kind, and you are safe to rest. Leave one window of thought slightly open for the breeze of mercy. Let it move the curtains of worry back and forth until stillness gathers. When dawn lifts the line of the horizon, you will be ready to begin again. Sleep softly, traveler of quiet histories.